born in Kingsford, Michigan in August 29th, 1925. First 4 years of my life I spent in Kingsford, and then we moved to Norway, where my dad was the mining company doctor down here. And then I lived in Norway until 1943 when I graduated from high school. Upon graduation from high school, I went to Chicago where my dad had moved, and I had lived here with Mr. and Mrs. Tom Williams for the last 2 years of high school. But most of my friends from graduation class of 43 were already in the service. They had been drafted during the year. Upon graduation, they were all called up. I worked in Chicago for that summer. As I was approaching my birthday on August the 29th, I decided that I didn't want to go in the Army, so I figured I better go and enlist in the Navy, which I did. And I enlisted, I was 17 at the time, turned 18 on a troop train going to Farragut, Idaho. Following boot camp, I was sent to San Diego, California to attend Hospital Corps School. And upon graduation from the Hospital Corps School, I was then sent to the U.S. Naval Hospital at Norman, Oklahoma. And I spent about three or 4 months there. I don't remember exactly how long, but then I was transferred to the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. And I was at Pensacola for about 8 months, and I got my orders to go overseas. So then I was shipped to Guam, and I spent the next 16 months on Guam, and I was attached to a U.S. Naval Medical Research Unit, which was a unit that was funded by the Rockefeller Center out of New York City, and they were supposed to cure and prevent some of the diseases that were affecting our troops overseas, like malaria and dengue and schistosomiasis and stuff like that. And they set up a base over there with about 7 or 8 labs, similar to malaria, and it's transferred by a mosquito, as malaria was. We left the States on December the 1st of 1944, and I think the island was secured in August of 44. And of course, it took us about a month to get over there because we stopped in Pearl Harbor and some of these other places on a troop ship. And by the time we got to our outfit, there was still Japanese that were running around on the island, but they were hiding. They called them jungle boys over there. We had to build our outfit. When we got there, it was nothing but jungle. We were all medical personnel, and we all served on construction to build our outfit first. And then when we got done building it, they gradually moved people into the labs. Myself, I never got into labs, which was fine with me. I stayed out on the outside detail. They had some CBs that they assigned to our outfit. Since we were all hospital corpsmen and medical personnel, we didn't know anything about construction, and the CBs were like our bosses, and they told us do this, do that. Like, I started off on a cement crew. You had to put a base down for all the buildings we had, and I stayed on that, and then we started building the buildings, which were these Butler buildings. And by the time we left, everything had been all cleared off, and it was a nice camp. There were islands that were bypassed out there. For instance, Guam was the southernmost island of the Marianas, and just north of Guam there was a little island called Rota. When they came through and took Guam, they bypassed Rota and went up and took Tinian and Saipan. But the island of Rota was still occupied by the Japanese, and they just bypassed them, and those guys were stuck out there. They had no contact with home, they had no supplies coming in, and as a matter of fact, they used to, when the planes would go over to practice strafing or something, they'd go over Rota and strafe the island. They brought the Japs back to Guam, and they made a big POW camp, which was about maybe 2 or 3 miles down the road from where we were. And they took all of these prisoners of war, and they would assign them to different places all around the island to do labor for the different units. And we being on the outside detail, our job was to go down and they were assigned 10 Japs to our unit every day. And we'd jump in a weapons carrier and we'd go down and we'd pick up the 10 Japs and we'd bring them to the base, and then we would have them do all the work. So we really had it made, you know. And this went on until, I don't know what they ever happened to those. They finally, I guess they sent them back home eventually, but when we were there, they were still there. And they didn't holler about surrendering at the end of the war. They were mighty glad to get back because they had food to eat, and you know, they were stuck out there. You know, they were like us. They didn't know what they were doing out there. Well, the way we would question them, you know, how did you surrender? How did you know the war was over? So the guy told me, he says, they came with a destroyer and they had loudspeakers on it. And they kept announcing to the Japs on the island that the war was over, that they should surrender. And he said most of them gladly gave up. They wanted to get off that island and get where there was people, you know. So anyway, I said, well, did they all? He said, no. He says, some of them wouldn't give up. He said, they stayed there. And he says, as a matter of fact, he told me, he says, this guy could speak English. And he said, they gave me a sidearm. And they told me to go back and get these guys to come in. And most of them gave up gladly, and they were sad looking when they came. You know, they were all skinny and bones and everything. But by the time I left, they were getting quite plump. They'd come in, and after everybody would eat in our mess hall, and then we'd bring the Japs in to eat, and everything would go that was left over on the line, they'd throw on their plates. See? They didn't care. They'd put a piece of pie on it, they'd throw the mashed potatoes on the pie. But they didn't bother anybody. Matter of fact, there was one guy that I read about that he was on Guam for 31 years, a Jap. And he did not give up until then, 31 years after the war ended. So, they were out there, but they didn't bother anybody. Anyway, I stayed out there till the end of the war then. And then I was shipped back home to the States and got discharged. But that's about my story.